Hey guys, it's Dan with Philosophical Fishing. How are you today? I hope that you're all doing well, and I hope that your healing journeys are going well, and that you're finding some peace and some windows and some contentment. Thank you so much for you guys who have commented and are supporting each other. I see a lot of comments coming up, and I see a lot of you who are struggling, and some of you who have come a little farther who are kind of reaching back to help other people on their journey. So thank you guys so much for that. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking these videos. Thank you for commenting. I hope they're helping, and that's my purpose for making them. I just want to put good out into the world. I have experienced a huge amount of healing in my life, and I wanted to share a lot of those things, a lot of the tools that I've used to get to the point where I am now 7 years clean and sober and 7 years off of benzos. And so that's my purpose for making these videos, and I'm going to keep making them as long as they're helping people. So I do hope that you guys are finding them helpful. Today, I'm going to make a video that's going to be very vulnerable. And I do that because you guys have been so vulnerable with me in the comments. And I've seen so many of you say things that I think otherwise would be very, very difficult to talk about anywhere else. And so the fact that you guys trust me enough to open up and be vulnerable with me, I'm going to do the same thing today. And what I'm going to talk about is pretty tough for me because I just don't like talking about it. It's uncomfortable, but I also think that it's going to be helpful in the discussion on why we even started on benzos in the first place, at least some of us. I mean, I know there's a lot of us out there who were prescribed them for sleep or for, some other reason or some medical condition, and they were totally oblivious. So maybe this video isn't as much for those people, or maybe it is. But I think specifically what I'm going to talk about is going to be directly applicable to those people like myself who have had a lot of problems with inferiority and a lot of diagnosed depression and anxiety in their past. People who have struggled with mental health issues is who this video is going to be more geared towards. So if that's you, then hopefully I'm speaking to you, and hopefully I'm going to say something in this video which will resonate with you, and maybe even you would feel some connection with what I'm about to talk about. And what I want to discuss today is called the shadow self. So if you're not familiar with what the shadow self is, your shadow self is, and everybody has one. Everybody has a shadow self. Your shadow self is basically that part of you that you feel you don't want to address, you don't want to see, you find it objectionable, or you find it less than acceptable, just generally speaking. So for instance, a shadow self could be a part of you that you feel is weak or can't stand up for themselves. Or a shadow self could be somebody that flies into rage and anger and is triggered by some kind of past trauma or PTSD. And now that shadow self is kind of incorporated in your ego and in your personality, but it's that side of you that you would rather repress and not look at and shut down, and definitely not expose to anybody because it would be way too vulnerable. Not express to anybody like I'm about to do on this video that could go out to, hundreds of people. But I don't care. I think it's important, and so I'm just going to talk about it. And I hope that it resonates with somebody. So my shadow self is a middle school kid in a junior high that was bullied and that felt inferior and was filled with a lot of shame and was dealing with a lot of trauma at home and didn't know how to cope with it. My shadow self is a 13-year-old scared kid running around this junior high, trying not to get shoved into lockers, trying not to get bullied, and just generally really, really troubled and had no tools to deal with it, and really not much support at all either. And so let me give you a picture of what I was like in 7th grade. I should dig out my old junior high book and put a picture of myself up here, because I was 12 or 13, but I looked like I was about 8 or 9. And I wasn't short, but I was really skinny, and I kind of had these like big teeth with I had a my teeth had like this big gap in the middle, and my teeth are kind of big anyway, so it kind of looked, it like made my front teeth look like they were even bigger. And I was embarrassed and afraid to smile in pictures, or like to smile in front of girls, or just generally, because I was always very like self-conscious about it. I didn't come from a poor family, but I came from a family that was very conscientious about spending money on things that we didn't need. And so I didn't have, like the cool kid clothes, or, whatever shoes were like in. So I got made fun of. People made fun of me. They made fun of my clothes. They made fun of the way I dressed. I wasn't one of the big, strong kids in PE yet, in gym class. I hadn't really developed yet. Like I said, I was kind of a scrawny, skinny kid and kind of nerdy. So I got pushed around in PE class a little bit. I got made fun of, and it was just generally a pretty shitty time in my life. Yeah. I hated going to school. There was one particular guy who bullied me on the bus, and I was really scared of him. I mean, he was huge. He was freaking massive. And like I said, I was not. So I kind of felt backed into a corner, and I felt really scared of this guy. And, I was kind of like, it was filling me up with all this emotional rage that I wanted to express, but I just had to shove down when I was at school, because I was just too fearful. And then other times, if somebody like my size would try to push me around, I would sometimes explode, and I would want to fight those guys, and I would start to get into it with them. But generally speaking, I didn't know how to process my fear. I didn't know how to process my rage. And so there was a lot of bottling up. There was a lot of shoving that down. And when you do that, that emotion has to go somewhere. It has to be expressed somehow, because it's an energy. And that energy is going to live in your body if you don't find some way to get it out. And like I said, I didn't have any tools to deal with to be able to do that. There was also a lot of things going on at home. I really don't want to get into that too much for the purpose of this video, but just suffice it to say, there was a lot of trauma happening, and just more stuff at home, just kind of like I was getting at school, but I was also getting at home. And I also didn't know how to process all that stuff that was going on. So am I painting a picture for you? I'm this scared, kind of scrawny kid in junior high, getting bullied, getting shoved around, and I was internalizing all of it. And it made me into a very shame-ridden individual. I felt all this shame for who I was, for what I looked like, for my seeming inability to deal with bullies or people who wanted to push me around. And I was also not getting good grades in school. So then academically, I also felt like I was subpar to the other kids that I was hanging out with. I could go on and on about it. I think I've kind of made the point, but my tools to deal with this was I started to make friends with some of the bigger and rougher kids who I thought could help defend me. And they did. I actually did have friends that would attack the bullies who were coming after me. And so that was kind of my only way that I could find to deal with middle school life. And okay, so why am I talking about all this? Well, this guy that I'm talking about, the 12, 13-year-old Dan, is my shadow self. That's my shadow self. That's the person that I don't really want to recognize or to admit that person is still part of me, still part of my being. Sometimes I still feel like the bullied kid. Sometimes I still feel weak. Sometimes I still feel filled with a whole lot of shame. And that can come about very, very quickly. I can be triggered sometimes really easily, and all this subconscious stuff can really still bubble to the surface and still come out. Even though Even though I've experienced so much healing in the last 7 years and so many things physically, mentally, emotionally have been purged and have come out of my body, and that's wonderful. I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you if that hadn't have happened. I wouldn't even be able to talk about this stuff if I hadn't already experienced a tremendous, huge amount of healing. However, there are still things in me that I recognize are part of my shadow self. There is still darkness that lives in my body that I recognize I still need to deal with. It's still there, and it's a real force to be reckoned with sometimes. So, what's your shadow self? Who is your shadow self? Do you have a shadow self like mine that's a middle school kid trapped in an adult body? Or a younger kid, maybe a child, maybe a toddler that was abused or went through some kind of trauma that still comes up in you, that you still see that every once in a while, although you don't want to recognize it and you would rather forget about it? What's your shadow self? Everybody's got one. Everybody has a shadow self to a greater or lesser degree. Maybe yours is rage. Maybe yours is unresolved anger. Maybe yours is loss. Maybe it's grief. Maybe you lost somebody or something that was really valuable to you and you felt unsteady and uneven the rest of your life. Maybe you felt abandoned by somebody, by a caregiver, by a parent. Maybe you were rejected or you were shamed by a parent, and that still lives in your body. And that becomes part of your shadow self that you have a really hard time dealing with anger or grief or rejection by somebody in your life. Whatever it is, it can be different for everybody, but it's a force that we need to, at some point, embrace and realize that it's there. Now, why am I talking about the shadow self? This is a benzodiazepine healing recovery channel on YouTube. I'm talking about it because it is all part and parcel of healing from benzodiazepines, from addiction, or just in generally if you're trying to find different ways to cope with your mental health or find better ways to heal in your life from whatever it is. This is just generally something that's very, very helpful to be aware of that you may have, your shadow self. Where this comes into play for me as to why it's so important is because I know for me, when I started taking benzodiazepines, or when I started drinking, when I started taking pills, when I started using drugs, all these things that I would put in my body would quiet that shadow self. It would subdue it. And it would make it as if that shadow self never existed. That trauma never happened. That all that rage, that anger, the shame that I stuffed down inside my body, it erased it like it never even existed. And then I could show up in the world and I could present to the world as the person that I thought I needed to be. And as the person that I thought was acceptable. Because I could not accept my shadow self. That guy, that 13-year-old Dan, was completely unacceptable to me, and I didn't want to see him. So I found ways via drugs, alcohol, benzodiazepines to quiet him, to make him shut up, to rid him from my psyche. And it worked. Benzos worked in the beginning. They worked so well that they worked a little too well, as many of us have found out. The problem is, of course, benzos stop working. When benzos stop working, all that trauma, that shadow self, all of that stuff, all those emotions start to rise to the surface again. And now we have to deal with them in a healthier way. I know that for me, part of the reason that I abused benzos like I did and used benzos for such a long time was because, again, it allowed me to put a huge Band-Aid on all the trauma and the shame that I had been experiencing. So if you identify with your shadow self, or maybe you've never even taken a look at it before, first of all, I would say it's worth taking a look at. Get quiet, get a piece of paper out, get a pen, and start writing down, first of all, what are traits about yourself that you don't like or you would find objectionable. Things about yourself. It could be laziness, it could be anger, rage, frustration, guilt, shame, whatever it is, depression, anxiety. Write a list of those things about you that you find are a hindrance to the person that you would love to be, the person that you know is inside of you, but you have these traits that seem to block you. Write down a list of all these traits. Then, if you can, try to find a place in your life where you can identify perhaps where these traits came from, where they started to spring up. Why are you somebody who feels an intense amount of shame? Or why are you somebody that feels an intense amount of frustration when somebody leaves you, or you have a relationship and the person isn't acting the way that you would hope that they would, and you feel a sense of abandonment? Can you identify some time in your life where that happened, where something occurred that made you feel a certain way? If you can, identify who that is. Where were you at that time? How old were you? Where were you living? Who is this person? Get an idea of who this person is at this time in your life. Again, for me, it was a scared 13-year-old kid running around, getting bullied in middle school. That's where a lot of this happened for me. Take a look at that person. That's you. That's part of you. And that person is still inside of you. That person is still a part of your personality and a part of your being. And let me just offer you that person that you're looking at wants to be seen. That person wants to be recognized. That person wants to be loved. That person is a part of your ego, has become a part of you. That person doesn't want to be denied anymore. That person doesn't want to be shut out. And that person doesn't want to be rejected anymore. And as an exercise in meditation, I would say, talk to that person and ask them what they need for their healing, for them to be able to go forward, for you to be able to go forward. Because if you're watching this, probably you're at least 18 years old. So you're at least a legal adult. Probably you're older. You could be like me. And I'm looking at somebody 20-something years ago, 30 years ago, who was scarred and rejected and felt bullied, felt threatened, and had no way to deal with it. And I look at that person and I look at that 13-year-old Dan and I ask him, what does he need from me? What does he want me to see? Maybe he just wants me to acknowledge him. Maybe. I know that for me, I know that healing from benzodiazepines or from drug addiction or just healing in general takes work to look at the vulnerable parts of ourselves. I feel so vulnerable in this video. And I hope that me being vulnerable can help you do the same and help you take a look in your own life to see what's going on with your shadow self so that you can be honest with yourself, be honest with your past, be honest with your shadow self. Because as you do this work, as you take a look at all these things from a different point of view, you're going to be amazed at how much healing you're going to find. Why even talk about, any of this shit today? Why do it? Because it sounds crazy, because it sounds like it's too much, because it sounds like I don't want to look at that stuff. No, we do it because you're going to find an incredible amount of healing on the other side of doing this work, of looking at your shadow person, of looking at the things in your past that have been holding you down. I promise you. I've seen it myself and I continue to see it. The more I'm able to be honest with myself, to take a look at what's going on with benzodiazepines, with drug addiction, with depression, there's something behind that. There's something going on with it. And the more and more I find these things in myself, and the more I'm able to confront it, the more I'm able to become aware of it, the more I'm able to step by step move past it. These things don't work like benzos did, where I take a pill and 20 minutes later, all these things are gone. It takes a little bit of effort, but it is so worth it. It's so worth it to see the you that will step out, that will transform as a result of using these practices. I promise you, try it. Write it down. Take a look at it. Talk to your shadow self. Ask them what they need. See what comes up for you. It's going to help you. It's going to help you so much. Whether you're in a taper or you're done tapering or you're thinking about tapering or you just came off drugs, or no matter where you're at, I promise you it can help you. So I hope you found this video helpful. I feel so vulnerable. I'm going to go edit this video and I'm going to try to get it up tonight. And I love you guys. I wish you all so much healing. Thank you guys for liking, for subscribing, for helping each other out. It's awesome. So I wish you all healing. I love you guys.